Today, many retirement planning software tools give you a retirement success score that looks like this. Let's say you have a 76% chance of meeting your goals in retirement. Well, heck, 76% is not very good. You might consider adjusting your goals based on this score or even push back retirement. Well, in today's video, I'm going to tell you there's more to look at than just this success score. So what are these common retirement success scores and how should we think about them as we look at our retirement plan? This is a couple who has a sizable nest egg, but also lives in a reasonably expensive state and wants to spend 6 figures in retirement. Common method in retirement planning is to use something called a Monte Carlo analysis. This is a process in which you take an investment portfolio and simulate future potential returns and then overlay this into a retirement plan. It's kind of like asking the question, if we ran your retirement 1,000 times, how many of those simulated retirements would be successful? In this Monte Carlo, we see that the answer is 769 of those scenarios. Now, the question at hand, is this a satisfactory score? If we go back to grade school, it's a C, which is maybe a fine grade for some, but reframed a different way, would you get on a plane that has a 1 in 4 chance of crashing or not reaching its destination? How do we know what a good score is? That's what I want to talk about in today's video. And probability success scores is an area where context really matters. Let me explain. So first, let's talk about some foundational problems with summarizing everything in a retirement plan in one simple, clean score. First, the human brain loves binary outcomes. This is a bias of the human brain. Something is either right or wrong, a success or a failure. There's no in-between in today's world. But that's really not how life plays out. Successes and failures are often a spectrum. So we shouldn't rely too much on just looking at a defined score, as I'll show in this video. Further, what score are you comfortable with? Is 90% good enough? 95%? A set of retirees would love to see a 100% score there, but 100% probability success is or should be impossible. Things can always happen, and so there's always a level of uncertainty that we have to become comfortable with. What level is too much? Then finally, the biggest problem that I have with retirement success scores is they don't factor in adjustments. Now, in reality, I don't know too many retirees that could, let's say, see their portfolio drop by 70% and not make an adjustment to their spending plan. Just continue on the track that they're on and spend that portfolio to zero before the end of their retirement. That's not necessarily a realistic situation. So again, failure is relative. Over the next few minutes, I plan to give you 5 contextual things to consider when you're looking at probability success scores. Within this context, you'll see that a potential 50% probability success might be a fine score for some. Again, I want to drive home that the context matters in this discussion. For instance, an issue that I find in probability of success approaches is that many retirees will group all of their goals together and then just run a broad probability success score. But consider the composition of your goals. Within your spending goals, you probably have an essential budget that we need to make sure we maintain and never drop below in retirement. You might also have a discretionary budget for things like eating out and travel that we could potentially cut in a bad situation. And then you have a load of other goals like maybe helping your grandchildren through college or leaving $500,000 per child or so on. So when we group all of these goals together, your probability of success of reaching every goal might actually be a lower score, like let's say 65%. Well, that's not a great score. But what if we separate these goals out? You might find that you view success scores completely differently. A 99% score of reaching your essential spending is a fantastic score. An 88% probability of being able to spend your full discretionary budget is also pretty good. It's really only the estate goal in this situation that has that lower score. Just looking at your summary number, you might feel bad about your retirement in general, but we see here, this is a pretty great situation unless this estate goal is something they want to work longer for in order to increase. Next, I also think it's extremely informative in this approach to look at when failures happen. In a randomized Monte Carlo process, weird trials can happen, like negative returns for 10 straight years. Now, of course, this is possible in the real world, but is it realistic? Or more importantly, we have to decide when we are comfortable failing. For instance, on the screen, I have a failing trial where this couple runs out of money 5 years early before the end of their planned retirement. But the average return for this 30-year period of time was around 3%. Is it possible this could happen in real life? Of course. But is it likely enough that we want to focus on this failed scenario and make sure we avoid it? I would argue probably not. For example, the lowest 20-year return for stocks in the past 75-ish years was around 7%. For a balanced portfolio, it was around 5%. And that's over a 20-year period of time, let alone a 30-plus year retirement. Let's say you have a batch of failed trials when your portfolio earns a negative return. In my opinion, I am comfortable failing a trial or retirement like that. This is a risk in investing. If you're not comfortable with the chance of failure in a negative return environment, then I'd recommend you look at guarantees like an income annuity, for instance. What level of risk are you comfortable with? What failures are you comfortable with? In addition, what happens if the majority of those failures happen in the last 5 years? Say you're 65. Now, we might want to plan for a 30-year retirement to make sure we adequately plan for longevity protection. Say you have a 75% success score, but of those failures, 95% of the failures happen in the last 5 years. How much should we really worry about this? Based on JP Morgan's data, there's an 8% chance of a male living to 95 and a 14% chance for a female. So if you have a 25% chance of failing, but most of your failures come at the very end of your plan, which you have a smaller chance of making it to the end of, again, context matters. Next, consider what you have left over in this failing situation. This is a big psychological reason I'm personally a fan of trying to obtain a very large Social Security benefit. In a bad case scenario, you have a big guaranteed income stream to fall back on. For instance, say you have a 35% chance of failure, but if you fail, your guaranteed income sources cover approximately 86% of your goal income. This type of failure is far different than if your guaranteed income only covered 30% of your income needs. So every person's success score should be looked at in relation to their individual situation. Then there are also cases where I see a retiree wanting to plan conservatively. And this makes a lot of sense to an extent. If you know you can retire successfully, even if your retirement is stressed by an unexpected factor, that can give you a ton of peace of mind as you enter this next phase of your life. But this can also be taken way too far. I'm all for stress testing, like asking the question, what if Social Security is cut in the future, or what if inflation is higher than expected? But the problem here is I see many overly conservative planners start to stack all of these risks to the point where their success score drops majorly. Now, make sure you're keeping in mind the original point of planning or the boundaries of planning. I can make every plan fail with the right assumptions. That's not the goal here. The goal is to plan realistically and then stress test and see if there are any risk factors that could hurt your plan. Then we may want to plan to overcome or avoid those risks or assume those risks. And then finally, one of those bigger mistakes that I see is overusing a Monte Carlo analysis. A Monte Carlo is not a perfect system, it's just a tool. A Monte Carlo is a naive approach, meaning that it doesn't factor in our place in history. Let me explain. In December of 2021, we were at near an all-time high in the market. Your success score was probably pretty high on a relative basis. 9 months later, after a 20% decline in your portfolio, say you reran this Monte Carlo and now you're at a 76% chance. Is this really a valid number to tie your plan and expectations to? I would argue no. A Monte Carlo doesn't understand if we're at a market high or a 50% decline. It naively randomizes returns from the point we are at today. But we know that on average, markets rebound faster after a decline. So the best way to account for this might be something like a regime Monte Carlo, meaning that the next 5 years of return have the potential to be higher than average. Then we might want to revert after those 5 years back to historical expectations. I know of only one retirement planning software that has this as an option. And so again, I would caution against overusing a Monte Carlo and keeping a running probability of success. It's not really a valid approach and it has some major issues. Now, with all of this, you may get the idea that I don't like probability of success scores or Monte Carlo tests. And that's the exact opposite of what I'm trying to convey here. I think both are great tools, but they are just that, a tool. We use both at times in our practice, but as part of a larger process, not just as a standalone answer like many retirement softwares use them. You need to not focus just on the summary number, but rather dig into the context because that's where all of the meaning in a retirement plan comes from. In addition, you are probably sick of me saying this, but I believe the best approach is to use a Monte Carlo analysis alongside a dynamic income approach. A huge number of failures that you might see in a Monte Carlo approach with no adjustments can be avoided by making some small dynamic adjustments during really bad phases of your retirement. In the distribution phase, small adjustments can maintain the long-run sustainability of your portfolio and are a natural answer for most retirees. meaning that retirees would adjust their spending in a really bad environment on their own. This is just a data-driven way to do so and be able to test it over a retirement plan or number of simulation. And so it might surprise you, but your retirement plan might be much stronger than your success score leads you to believe. If you're someone wanting to learn a little bit more about dynamic income strategies, click on this video right here, where I talk about a recent paper published by Morningstar that talks about 6 withdrawal methods, some static, some dynamic, and talks about the benefits and drawbacks of each. Click here to learn more, and always remember, you don't need more money, you need a better plan. Thanks so much for watching today.